Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I really appreciate, I want to say thank you to Justin for really engaging us as a city in this dialogue. I think it's really, really important. Working in the hospital, and I have one of my chaplains here actually, we often are faced with families who've never had the conversation and who have to make decisions. And so I'm just really grateful for helping our city become more comfortable with these conversations. As you were speaking about the role of silence, I was reflecting in the Hebrew Bible when Aaron sees his two sons, Nadav and Avihu, who are killed in front of him. The text says, Vayidom Aharon, and Aaron was silent. And I think that at the core, before I even begin, and I'm very humbled to try to speak to this topic, there is this awareness that really it's hard to put into words that which is unknowable. Judaism, we believe that we cannot pronounce God's name. So the Tetragrammaton, Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey, we don't pronounce it in Judaism. We say Adonai, my Lord, or Hashem, the name. But we don't pronounce it because of this recognition that God is beyond what words or human language can begin to understand. So with that, and also with the caveat that Judaism is incredibly diverse, and there are multiple forms of Judaism, and as much as, for example, a Baptist and a Presbyterian and an Episcopalian are all different, so too in Judaism, there are many differences from Orthodox and Hasidic to conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, Renewal, Humanistic. So there are multiple forms. But with that in mind, I will be speaking primarily from the stance of Hasidism, of mysticism, obviously with a slightly more liberal take since I am a Reform rabbi. So Judaism teaches fundamentally that we are not bodies. We have bodies, but we are not our bodies. We are souls, and that spirit that is breathed into us, according to the Hebrew Bible, it says, God breathed the breath of life into us. That breath is fundamentally unchanging. And there are multiple words in Hebrew for the word soul. So there's nefesh, ruach, neshama, yechida, chaya. Those are some of the words that are used for soul or spirit in Hebrew. And the rabbis really understand that those words reflect different aspects of the soul, and that it teaches us something about the way human beings were created and really the way the world was created. So we believe that God progressively enters into this world through progressive embodiment. And that our souls progressively become more enfleshed or embodied. That we have at our core this connection with God, which is unknowing, but which is what we call yechida. Yechida comes from the Hebrew echad, which means one. So we are at our core one, connected with God. But we have different levels of awareness, of being, and those correspond to different aspects of the soul. The most embodied part of us is nefesh, and that's our more animalistic soul. And then we have ruach, which is more our emotions, our awareness. And then we have neshama, which is the part of our soul that is sort of more the breath of God. And then there's chaya, which is what we might call like an aura a little bit. And then there's that central connection that is of God and unchanging. And so when we think of death, what we're aware of is that's the body, but the soul doesn't die. And a lot of people ask, well, what happens to the soul after death? And there are multiple teachings around that in Judaism, but the fundamental belief is that different aspects of our soul have different sort of next steps. So the most animalistic part of us remains close to those that it loves. So a lot of times you may hear, oh, I had a dream of my mom and it was like she was really there, or I feel like my mom was watching out for me, or something like that. And that would be what we would call nefesh. And Yechida, the soul that is of God, remains unchanging. And our aura is sort of like the collective unconscious. It remains unchanging. The neshama is really the breath of God that returns to God. And so really what happens is that part of us, which we call ruach, is the part of us that has feelings, choices, makes decisions. And there are two different teachings about death. One is that we believe in reincarnation. So if we did not get to what we needed to do in this earth, we come back again and again until we get it right. There is a teaching around what I'll use the word purgatory. It's not exactly purgatory, but we don't believe in hell because we believe that human beings have a variety of human conditions that cause them to do bad things. And so we understand that God can forgive what we can't forgive. But in hell, or in purgatory, no one stays in Judaism longer than a year. So let's take the worst person in the world, and I usually use the word Hitler. It's pretty bad. So, so we believe that one of the teachings is that part of the soul goes to this place, this sort of in-between place where we re-experience what we did to others, but beyond the confines of our body and our body's limits. So in this world, I only know what my brain, my filters, my experiences, my biochemistry and hormones tell me. But in the next world, when I'm no longer limited by my body, then I can experience from the perspective of others what I did to them. And that is a lesson in compassion. And the experience of going through that ultimately balances somebody out. And so that experience, in Judaism, we believe it takes about a year to kind of go through that. And nobody really goes through that whole year except for Hitler. But we have a variety of different traditions in Judaism where we recite a prayer every day. It's called the Kaddish. It's the sanctification of God's name. It actually doesn't mention God. It does mention God. It sanctifies God. It doesn't mention death at all. Because death isn't what's real. What's real is God. And it's meant to kind of help us reclaim that sanctification. And we say it every single day, and there's this belief that sort of helps, psychic energy helps our loved one through that process, that rectification process, so that they're able to go through it faster. So for that reason, Jewish tradition has mourning rituals that never last longer than a year. But the mourning rituals, you're supposed to go and recite the Kaddish in a community. A community in Judaism is called a minyan, and it's defined by 10 people. And so what you wind up doing is, with everyone else who is also grieving, you gather every day and you say this prayer. It becomes a form of a support group. And it's something that happens. And all of the steps of grief are meant not for the person, but really for the grieving person behind. So the first steps of after someone dies is their loved ones are supposed to participate in burying them. And that shoveling process is supposed to make it real. It's that final act of kindness of just like tucking them in. And then the first week, they're supposed to stay in their house in something called Shiva, where they just stay in their house and they sit. That's what the word Shiva means. It also is related to Sheva, which is 7. So you do this for the first week. You just sit. And people come to you and they bring you food. And you're just supposed to just sit. And then your first walk around the block is its own ritual. So all of the rituals in Judaism are really for the living to be able to grieve, because there is this recognition of grief. But that is our human need to grieve. The reality is that God is eternal, the soul is eternal, the soul did not die. We have this a poem that we say at funerals a lot, where it says, love does not die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away. And that's very much at the core of how we try to see Judaism. We try to see death and dying. In Judaism, the Talmud, which is our rabbinic text, teaches us that we should live every day as if it's our last, because it could be. And so every day in Judaism, there are certain prayers that are the prayers one is supposed to recite on one's deathbed. It's a prayer for forgiveness, and it's a prayer of affirmation of faith. The Shema from Deuteronomy chapter 6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is my God, the Lord is one. And then, please forgive me for anything I've done. That's recited 3 times a day, and the idea is we never know when we're going to die. And so that awareness of saying those prayers every day is supposed to help us be mindful to make the most of this day, because it could be our last, so that we don't just procrastinate our task, because we have been sent on earth to do God's work of bringing healing in the world and partnering with God and continuing the work of creation. And so the task before us is to be always mindful. And those prayers that we recite every day, 3 times a day, is meant to remind us to be mindful of these moments, so that we can live according to what we were called to do, which is to be spiritual beings placed in a world that is not yet completed in its perfection, and that we have been called to heal, to fix all that's broken. And that is what we believe.
Thank you so much. Wow. Rabbi Nadia, that was quite insightful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to open it up now for other panelists to comment, should they like to, at this point, on what you've heard.
When you mentioned about the soul, it struck me too, something that C.S. Lewis said, that, you know, we don't have a soul, we are a soul that has a body. Mm-hmm. And that union between body and soul is we'll probably discuss more about that, is part of the problem of how people deal with dying, right? Because if they're fixated on the dying of the body, they lose a spiritual meaning often. Can you say something more about that?
Well, and I would say that at the core, that's the problem with living. We believe that the material world is real, and we invest a lot of time and energy in that, and sometimes we miss what really matters. And so being reminded that the only thing that's real is God and the soul and our purpose here to love one another, we can try to not be distracted by the ego, by capitalism, by the variety of things that get in the way of our doing God's work. And so if we do that, then we are not quite as prone to suffer. And that, you know, I think Buddhism speaks to that as well, but that certainly is Jewish teaching as well.